Keir Starmer has vanished from public view at the precise moment Britain teeters on the edge of multiple crises. Coincidence? Hardly. The Prime Minister, the man who vowed to be a leader for all of Britain, is now missing in action when leadership is needed most. And the excuses his team has been throwing out? Paper-thin. Insulting even. Let's not pretend this is just a scheduling mishap or a case of unfortunate timing. Something is deeply wrong here. His absence is becoming a pattern, a carefully orchestrated disappearing act, and the more we dig into the reasons, the more disturbing it gets. His team is scrambling to manage the optics, deflecting questions, fabricating explanations, but the cracks are showing. They claim other commitments kept him from meeting farmers who had tractors ready to confront him. Really? As if the Prime Minister's advance team, whose entire job is to plan his schedule meticulously, just forgot to check who would be there. Who actually believes that? But this isn't just about avoiding difficult encounters. Starmer's cancellations have been accelerating in frequency, and it's no coincidence that this started happening right after his disastrous performance at PMQs. That session exposed something his handlers have been trying to cover up: his increasingly obvious struggle with public speaking, his inability to handle pressure, and, more worryingly, the signs of a man losing control. Just look at what happened. 17 times. That's how often Starmer stuttered, fumbled, or froze in the span of just 30 minutes. 17. A record for any Prime Minister in modern parliamentary history. If this had happened once or twice, fine, everyone can have an off day. But 17 times? That's not a bad day. That's a man struggling with something much deeper. And the most telling part? His own Labour MPs could barely contain their alarm. Normally, you'd see them nodding along, waving their papers in support. But that day, they sat there, shifting in their seats, glancing at each other, visibly uncomfortable, as their leader melted down in real time. And then came the cover-up. Parliament's official record, Hansard, was mysteriously edited to remove evidence of his stumbles. Think about that. The government is literally rewriting history to erase signs of the Prime Minister's decline. But here's the problem. The video evidence exists. The footage is out there, unaltered, undeniable. Anyone can watch it and see what happened. Yet Number 10 expects the public to ignore their own eyes and believe the sanitized version of events they're spoon-feeding the media. But let's go beyond just PMQs. Because what's happening behind the scenes is even more revealing. Last Tuesday, a group of medical specialists, including speech therapists and neurological experts, were spotted entering Downing Street. Now, let's be clear, these are not the kind of visitors you'd expect if Starmer was simply dealing with a busy schedule. You don't call in neurological experts because your Prime Minister is a little tired. You don't bring in speech therapists if everything is fine. And yet, not a single journalist in the mainstream media has dared to press Number 10 on this. Why the secrecy? Why the silence? If there's nothing to hide, why not address the speculation head-on? The answer is obvious. They don't want you to know. While Britain faces an economic downturn, while illegal immigration surges, while global tensions escalate, our Prime Minister is nowhere to be found. And in his absence, something even more dangerous is happening. Labour's internal war for power is spilling into the open. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is already positioning herself as the real power behind the throne. Leaked WhatsApp messages suggest she has openly dismissed Starmer, telling allies that he won't be around for much longer. This is a sitting Chancellor of the Exchequer essentially declaring that the Prime Minister is on his way out. And she's not the only one. David Lammy's Foreign Office has begun operating like a rogue government, making major policy decisions that contradict the Treasury. Meanwhile, Angela Rayner is reportedly holding secret meetings, gathering support, forming what one insider called a shadow cabinet within the cabinet. The result? Britain is now effectively leaderless. Cabinet meetings have become battlegrounds where rival factions push competing agendas, ignoring Starmer entirely. According to Labour insiders, when Starmer does show up, he sits there in silence, barely engaging, while his ministers fight over control of the government. And let's not forget what's happening on the world stage. Because while Downing Street descends into chaos, Starmer's government is making reckless foreign policy moves that could drag Britain into direct conflict with Russia. Quietly, behind closed doors, He has authorized military commitments to Ukraine that cross red lines even Boris Johnson wouldn't have dared approach. Most disturbingly, these escalations always seem to happen when Starmer is unavailable. His government recently signed a £30 million contract for advanced drone systems to be sent to Ukraine. Drones designed to monitor and strike targets, practically guaranteeing Russian casualties. And what was Starmer doing when this deal was announced? Nowhere to be found. This isn't a diplomatic move. This is a desperate man trying to project strength internationally while his authority crumbles at home. It's reckless, it's dangerous, and it's happening without proper scrutiny. Meanwhile, on the domestic front, things are just as bad. Britain's economy is flatlining at 0.1% growth, essentially dead in the water. Illegal migration is at record levels. Just days ago, nearly 600 people crossed the Channel in a single day. That's a 20% increase compared to last year. The promise to stop the boats has collapsed along with Starmer's public appearances. And perhaps the most damning part? Labour's own judicial appointments are effectively rewriting immigration law from the bench. Recent rulings have allowed individuals to bring in relatives they haven't seen in over 2 decades. That's not policy, that's a complete subversion of democratic governance. Reeves's economic strategy is crumbling. Analysts predict that the Office for Budget Responsibility will have to downgrade growth forecasts, wiping out the so-called fiscal headroom she claimed to have. What does that mean? More spending cuts, more tax hikes, and all of this while Britain's public services are already buckling under pressure. Yet through all of this, Starmer is absent, hiding, dodging. His appearances grow more erratic, his speech more troubled, his grip on government slipping. The British people deserve answers. If Starmer is unwell, if he is struggling with a condition that affects his ability to lead, then the public has a right to know. Not every detail, perhaps, but enough to judge whether he is fit to remain in office. Instead, we're being lied to. We're being told to ignore the obvious. We're watching history repeat itself, just as Churchill's strokes were hidden, just as Harold Wilson's dementia was covered up, just as Anthony Eden concealed his serious health issues. But this time, Britain is in crisis. We cannot afford a Prime Minister who disappears when the going gets tough. Starmer's team is desperate to keep the truth from the public. They attack journalists who ask questions. They edit official records. They circulate talking points to Labour MPs, instructing them on how to deflect scrutiny. This is not normal political strategy. This is full-scale damage control. And yet, the most damning question remains. If they are lying to us about this, what else are they hiding? Keir Starmer has vanished. Not in the metaphorical sense, not as a political figure struggling with declining approval ratings, but quite literally, he is nowhere to be seen. And this isn't just a coincidence. This isn't just a scheduling conflict or a case of a Prime Minister taking some time away from the spotlight. No, this is something else entirely. Because when a leader disappears at the exact moment their country is facing a cascade of crises, when their team is working overtime to explain away absence after absence, you have to ask, what are they hiding? Think about it. Putin is escalating tensions in Ukraine, Europe is on the edge of an international crisis, and at home, Britain is drowning under economic stagnation, rising immigration numbers, and a cost of living disaster. This is the moment when leadership is most needed, when decisive action should be taken. And yet, Starmer is nowhere to be found. His absence is not only suspicious, it is damning. And the excuses? Laughable. First, he had scheduling conflicts. Then, it was prior commitments. Then, the classic, we had no idea farmers with tractors would be there. Really? Are we expected to believe that a Prime Minister's advance team, who are paid to meticulously plan his every movement, somehow forgot to check who was going to be at an event? Who believes that? But let's go deeper. This isn't just about avoiding an uncomfortable confrontation with angry voters. This is about a man whose ability to function under pressure is rapidly deteriorating. And the proof? It's all there, right in front of us. Take his last PMQs, Keir Starmer, a man who built his career on rhetoric and debate, stood at the dispatch box and crumbled. He stuttered, he froze mid-sentence, he lost his train of thought completely, 17 times. That is not normal. That is not a bad day at the office. That is something much more serious. And everyone saw it. His own Labour MPs, usually eager to show their support, sat in silence. No enthusiastic nodding, no paper waving, just awkward glances and shifting in their seats as their leader visibly fell apart in front of them. And then came the cover-up. The official record, Hansard, was edited to remove the worst of his stumbles. That should terrify you. Because when a government starts rewriting history, when it begins manipulating official parliamentary records to hide the reality of its leader's decline, you know something serious is happening behind closed doors. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. Last Tuesday, medical specialists, including speech therapists and neurological experts, were spotted entering Downing Street. Now, I don't know about you, but last I checked, Prime Ministers don't usually require neurological specialists unless there's something seriously wrong. You don't bring in experts like that to deal with a minor cold or a busy schedule. And yet, the mainstream media has been silent. No questions. No investigations. No demands for answers. It's as if they've collectively agreed to look the other way, just as they did when Boris Johnson's health became a matter of national concern, just as they did with Thatcher's cognitive decline in her final years. They will only admit it when it becomes impossible to deny. Meanwhile, as Starmer's ability to function in public deteriorates, something even more dangerous is happening in the shadows. Because power, as we all know, abhors a vacuum. And in his growing absence, Labour's internal war is intensifying. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is already making her move. According to leaked messages, she has openly dismissed Starmer in private conversations, telling allies that he won't be around for much longer. That is an extraordinary admission from one of the most senior members of his own government. Then there's David Lammy, whose Foreign Office is now operating like a separate government entirely, issuing contradictory statements on defense spending and Ukraine policy, completely ignoring number 10. And let's not forget Angela Rayner, who, according to insiders, is holding secret meetings to position herself as Starmer's successor. The result? Total paralysis. Britain now effectively has competing governments within a single administration, each vying for power, none of them willing to acknowledge what the rest of the country can see. The Prime Minister is no longer in control. And while Labour tears itself apart, Starmer's government is making reckless foreign policy decisions that could drag Britain into war. Behind closed doors, he has quietly authorised military escalations in Ukraine that cross red lines even Boris Johnson wouldn't have dared approach. His government has just signed a £30 million contract for advanced drone systems to be sent to Ukraine, drones designed to track and strike targets. And what was Starmer doing when this was announced? He was nowhere to be found. Think about that for a second. A Prime Minister, supposedly in charge of his country's foreign policy, is making decisions that could provoke direct Russian retaliation, and he is refusing to answer for them. Every major escalation in Britain's Ukraine policy has coincided with one of Starmer's unexplained absences. It's almost as if his government is being run without him. And at home, things are just as dire. Britain's economy has ground to a halt, registering a pathetic 0.1% growth, a statistical flatline. Meanwhile, illegal immigration is skyrocketing. Just days ago, nearly 600 migrants crossed the Channel in a single day. That's a 20% increase compared to this time last year. And what has Labour done? Absolutely nothing. Their promise to stop the boats has evaporated just as quickly as Starmer's public appearances. And now we get to the most sinister part. Because while the Prime Minister hides from the public, his own judicial appointees are quietly reshaping Britain's immigration policy from the bench. Judges have issued rulings that allow individuals to bring in relatives they haven't seen in over 2 decades. That is not a border policy. That is an open-door policy, written by unelected judges, completely bypassing Parliament. And where is Starmer in all of this? Where is his leadership? The answer is clear. There is no leadership. There is only a failing man, surrounded by ambitious rivals, desperately trying to keep the truth from the public for as long as possible. And they are terrified. They are terrified because they know what happens when the public realizes they've been lied to. They know what happens when people start asking the questions they don't want to answer. Why is Keir Starmer suddenly incapable of handling live events? Why has his ability to speak in public deteriorated so rapidly? Why are neurological experts being brought into Downing Street under the cover of silence? Why is his own government running without him? The cover-up is unsustainable. The excuses are collapsing. The public can see what's happening. And yet, they are still trying to keep the lie alive. Because here's the real scandal. This isn't just about Starmer's health. This is about a government that is willing to lie, manipulate, and rewrite history just to cling to power. This is about a political class that does not trust the British people with the truth. But the truth always comes out in the end. And when it does, when the full scale of this deception is finally exposed, there will be consequences. Starmer can try to hide. His team can try to silence the media. Labour can try to pretend that nothing is wrong. But the British people aren't stupid. They see it. They know it. And when the truth finally breaks through, when the lie collapses under its own weight, there will be nowhere left for Keir Starmer to hide. Keir Starmer is missing. Not just from the public eye, but from the very role he was elected to serve. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the man who promised stability, competence, and leadership, is now a ghost, appearing only when convenient, avoiding scrutiny, and, most alarmingly, failing to exert control over his own government. This isn't just political mismanagement. This is a leadership crisis spiraling into chaos. The cracks are no longer hidden. The Labour Party, sensing weakness, has erupted into a civil war that Starmer seems powerless to contain. His closest ministers no longer treat him as a leader, but as an obstacle to be sidestepped. Reeves, the Chancellor, has made it clear in private circles that Starmer won't be around for much longer. These are not the words of a loyal lieutenant. These are the words of a successor in waiting, someone who is actively undermining the Prime Minister while publicly pretending to support him. David Lammy, supposedly Starmer's Foreign Secretary, has taken matters into his own hands. His department has started issuing statements that directly contradict Treasury policies, particularly on defense spending and Ukraine. This is not a government speaking with one voice. This is a government at war with itself, with Starmer either unable or unwilling to enforce discipline. The result? Absolute paralysis. And then there's Angela Rayner. While Labour descends into factionalism, she has been quietly gathering support, building what insiders are calling a shadow cabinet within the cabinet. Ministers are meeting with her behind closed doors, positioning themselves for the inevitable collapse of Starmer's premiership. If this isn't a sign of a government in free fall, what is? This level of infighting isn't just an embarrassment, it's a direct threat to national security. High-level security meetings, crucial for coordinating responses to international threats, are reportedly being delayed or cancelled altogether because key ministers are too busy fighting each other. Sources within Whitehall describe an atmosphere of confusion, where even junior officials no longer know whose orders to follow. The British government has effectively split into competing power centres, each acting in its own interests, while the actual Prime Minister drifts further into irrelevance. And yet, while this chaos unfolds at home, something even more reckless is happening abroad. Starmer, the same Prime Minister who cannot keep his own cabinet in line, has been approving military escalations that could drag Britain into direct conflict with Russia. His latest decision? The quiet signing of a £30 million arms deal to supply advanced drone systems to Ukraine, drones designed for surveillance and targeted strikes. This isn't just sending humanitarian aid or defensive equipment. This is direct military involvement in a war that could escalate beyond control. The timing of these decisions is what should truly concern us. Every major escalation in Britain's Ukraine policy has happened while Starmer has been unavailable for questioning. His government has committed billions in aid, expanded Britain's military role, and increased its rhetoric against Russia, all while Starmer himself remains mysteriously absent. Who is making these decisions? Is the Prime Minister actually in charge? Or is someone else pulling the strings behind closed doors? This is the real danger. A government that no longer has a clear leader is a government that is vulnerable to manipulation. When a Prime Minister disappears, unelected figures step into the power vacuum. Advisors, civil servants, rival ministers, all fighting for control, all making decisions without accountability. And the consequences are terrifying. Take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Britain is facing multiple crises at once. The economy is stagnating, growing at a pathetic 0.1%, essentially a standstill. The public sector is in crisis. Immigration numbers have surged, with nearly 600 illegal crossings recorded in a single day, a 20% increase from last year. Meanwhile, British households are struggling under the weight of inflation, rising taxes, and a crumbling NHS. And where is the Prime Minister? Where is Keir Starmer? Instead of tackling these issues head-on, instead of providing the leadership Britain desperately needs, he is approving arms deals behind closed doors, dodging scrutiny, and watching as his government collapses into civil war. There is no direction, no plan, no control. Just a government spiraling into dysfunction while its leader hides from view. But here's what should truly alarm every single person in this country. While Starmer's absence leaves Britain leaderless, another power is quietly reshaping national policy. The courts. In the absence of firm leadership from Downing Street, Britain's immigration policy is now effectively being rewritten by judges. In recent weeks, judicial rulings have allowed individuals to bring in relatives they haven't seen in over 2 decades. These are not minor technical decisions. These rulings have fundamentally altered immigration policy without a single vote in Parliament, without a single elected representative being consulted. This is judicial overreach on an unprecedented scale. It is government by courts, not by democracy. And it is happening precisely because the Prime Minister is too weak, too absent, or too compromised to do anything about it. Rachel Reeves' economic plans are crumbling under their own weight. The Office for Budget Responsibility is now expected to downgrade growth forecasts, meaning the so-called fiscal headroom Reeves claimed to have will evaporate. What does that mean? More spending cuts. More tax hikes. More pain for ordinary British people, all because the government has no coherent economic strategy. And still, Starmer remains missing. His deteriorating presence is no longer just an inconvenience, it is a symptom of a deeper rot within his administration. This isn't just a failing government. This is a government in the midst of total institutional collapse. The Prime Minister is no longer able to govern. His cabinet is openly defying him. His party is actively plotting his removal. And all the while, Britain drifts aimlessly, rudderless in the middle of a storm. But the most important question remains. Why? Why has Keir Starmer disappeared? Why has his ability to function in public collapsed so dramatically? Why is his government working so aggressively to shield him from scrutiny? Because make no mistake, this is a cover-up. The excuses, the redactions of official records, the refusal to answer direct questions, it all points to one conclusion. There is something about Starmer's condition that they do not want the public to know. We already know that neurological experts have been seen entering Downing Street. We already know that his ability to speak in public has deteriorated to the point of 17 separate stumbles in a single parliamentary session. We already know that even his closest allies are treating him like a dead man walking. What else are they hiding? This is no longer about political strategy. This is about transparency. This is about whether Britain even has a functioning Prime Minister, or whether the country is being run by unelected officials operating in the shadows. The British people deserve answers. If Starmer is unwell, if his condition is affecting his ability to govern, then the public has a right to know. Not every detail, perhaps, but enough to make an informed judgment about his fitness for office. Instead, what we are getting is lies, deflection, and cover-ups. And the most damning part? They think they can get away with it. They think the British public won't notice. They think the media will continue to protect them. They think they can keep pushing out excuses until the inevitable happens, until Starmer is quietly replaced, and they can pretend this was all just a difficult period that has now been resolved. But the truth always comes out. And when it does, when the full scale of this deception is finally exposed, there will be consequences. Because this isn't just about Keir Starmer's failures. This is about a government that does not trust its own people with the truth.